She built a billion-dollar empire from a boardroom, but couldn't build the courage to let one man see past the wheelchair. Evelyn Hawthorne had conquered every room she entered, until she met a man who didn't care about her company, her fortune, or her diagnosis. Logan Mercer poured coffee for a living and raised his daughter alone. And he was the first person in 2 years to speak to Evelyn like she was still whole. This is the story of what happens when the most powerful woman in the room is also the most afraid. Like this video, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Evelyn Hawthorne arrived at the Hartwell Capital Quarterly Summit, she was 17 minutes late, and nobody said a word about it. That was the thing about being a CEO worth $4.2 billion. People adjusted. Schedules bent. Conference room doors swung open before her assistant could reach for them, and 12 men in tailored suits rose from their chairs, not because protocol demanded it, but because something about her presence made standing feel like the right response. Even now, even when she rolled in rather than walked. She navigated the doorway with the precise efficiency of someone who had spent 2 years learning to move through a world that wasn't designed for her wheelchair. A matte black custom model that her physical therapist called industrial grade, and that her PR team had once, disastrously, tried to photograph as a symbol of resilience for a Forbes profile she later killed. The chair was not a symbol, it was a tool. That was the only way she'd been able to keep moving. "Apologies for the delay," she said, and her voice was the same as it had always been. Low, unhurried. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to fill a room. "I had a call with our Singapore office that ran long. Let's not lose another minute." She set her tablet on the table, pulled up the acquisition deck, and spent the next 40 minutes dissecting the proposed merger between Hawthorne Technologies and a mid-sized logistics firm called Vantara Group, with the kind of focus that her CFO, Marcus Hale, privately described as surgical, and her board members described, less kindly, as relentless. There was no preamble. There was no small talk. There was the data, and then there was her assessment of the data, and then there was the path forward. By 10:45, 3 of the Hartwell analysts had stopped taking notes because she was covering ground faster than their pens could follow. By 11, they'd agreed to her terms. Marcus caught her in the corridor afterward, falling into step beside her, or rather, adjusting his stride so it matched her pace, which he'd gotten better at over the past year. He was a compact man in his mid-50s, gray at the temples, with the particular exhaustion of someone who genuinely loved his job but found the person he did it for occasionally bewildering. "That was efficient," he said. "That's what I was aiming for." Their lead analyst looked like you'd stepped on his thesis. His thesis had 3 unsupported assumptions and a valuation model that inflated Vantara's recurring revenue by about 18%. She turned a corner, navigating the slight ridge in the flooring without breaking rhythm. "He'll be fine. He'll revise it. That's how it's supposed to work." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Your father called the office this morning." Evelyn didn't change expression. "He calls the office most mornings. He wanted me to remind you about Sunday dinner." "I remember Sunday dinner." "He also wanted me to remind you—" Marcus hesitated. "Marcus. He said to remind you that the Delacroix family's son is going to be there. Apparently the kid just sold his fintech startup, and your father thinks—" "Tell my father," Evelyn said, stopping at the elevator and pressing the call button, "that I am 30 years old, that I have run a company with 900 employees since I was 26, and that if he introduces me to one more man whose primary qualification is that he once had a good idea about mobile payments, I will have Marcus redirect his calls." "Should I actually tell him that?" "No. Tell him I'll be there at 6. The elevator arrived. She rolled in. The doors closed. In the mirrored wall of the elevator, she looked at herself for exactly 3 seconds before she looked away. The coffee shop was not on her usual route. That was the first honest thing she would admit, later to herself. That she had no reason to be on Callaway Street at 8:15 on a Thursday morning. That her regular stop was a place called Meridian, 2 blocks from the office that had a ramp she'd measured herself and baristas who knew her order. But her morning had started badly. A call with their Hong Kong counsel that devolved into a jurisdictional argument she hadn't anticipated, traffic on the bridge that added 20 minutes, and a persistent low-grade headache that had been sitting behind her left eye since Tuesday. She'd taken a different way through the financial district. She'd seen the awning. Mercer's, in plain black letters on a cream background, with a chalk sandwich board out front that read, "Today's special, Ethiopian pour-over and the distinct pleasure of a quiet morning." It was the sign that stopped her. She wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe because it wasn't promising her anything grand. Maybe because it was specific about something small. The entrance was up 3 steps. There was no ramp. She sat on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the steps, doing the quiet math she always did. How bad do I want this? What are my options? Is there another door? There was a narrow side alley to the left of the building. She turned down it and found, around the corner, a secondary entrance. Just a door, propped open slightly, with a rubber wedge. No signage. She pushed through it and found herself in a small storage corridor that opened into the side of the main cafe. The space was warm. That was the first thing. Not aesthetically warm, though it was that too. Exposed brick, mismatched chairs, a low ceiling with wooden beams, afternoon plants lining the front windows even though it was still morning. Warm in the physical sense. Someone kept the heat at a reasonable level, which should not have felt remarkable, and somehow did. There were maybe 8 tables, a long wooden counter, an espresso machine that looked serious, and behind the counter, a man who was simultaneously making a drink and having a conversation with what appeared to be a small child sitting on a stool at the far end of the bar, doing homework. Evelyn found a table near the accessible route she'd come in from and pulled off her coat. A server, a college-age girl with red-framed glasses, appeared and slid a menu onto the table. "Be just a minute," she said. "Logan's finishing up a pour." Evelyn nodded and looked at the menu, which was hand-printed and short, which she liked. No QR codes, no 12 varieties of oat milk, just coffee, a few teas, 3 pastry options. Clean. "The Ethiopian's actually worth getting," said a voice. She looked up. The man from behind the counter was standing at the edge of her table, a ceramic mug in one hand and a small notepad in the other, though he didn't seem like he was about to write anything down. He was tall, maybe 6'2", the kind of build that came from actual physical work rather than a gym routine. Dark hair. A small scar along his jaw that looked old. He was wearing a gray Henley pushed up at the sleeves and an apron that had clearly been through some use. He was looking at her the way most people didn't. Directly, easily, without that brief downward flicker toward the wheelchair that she'd learned to track the way a soldier tracks movement in a tree line. "I've had Ethiopian pour-overs that weren't worth getting," she said. "Fair." He didn't argue the point. "This one's from a farm in Yirgachefi. The guy who roasts it is a friend of mine. He's been working with the same cooperative for 6 years. It's got a natural berry finish, not acidic. If you want something bolder, I'd do the Sumatra. How do you take your coffee?" He blinked, then smiled slightly. "Straight? Black?" "I'll have the Ethiopian." He went back to the counter. The little girl at the end of the bar had looked up from her homework to watch this exchange, then returned to her work with the focused intensity of someone who had been told several times that mornings were for concentration. The coffee arrived 4 minutes later. He set it down without ceremony and turned to go. "It's good," Evelyn said after the first sip. He looked back. "I'll let Daniel know." "The roaster." "Yeah." He went back behind the counter. The little girl said something quietly to him that Evelyn couldn't hear, and he responded by ruffling her hair in a way that was both automatic and entirely genuine, the kind of gesture you couldn't perform if you were thinking about it. Evelyn drank her coffee. She answered 3 emails. She did not look up as often as she thought she might. When she asked for the check, the girl with the red glasses brought it. The amount was $6.50 for the pour-over and a pastry she'd added on impulse. She left $20 on the table. On the way out, she heard the little girl say, "Dad, did she forget change?" And the man, Logan, said, "No, baby, she left it." "Oh." A pause. That was nice. Evelyn was already through the side door. She sat for a moment in the alley, the cold hitting her after the warmth of the shop, and she thought, I didn't tell him who I was. It was such a small thing, and it felt, unexpectedly, like a full breath. Sunday dinner at her father's house was always the same. The house was in Chevy Chase, large Tudor revival, the kind of place that had hosted congressional fundraisers and private gallery showings, and for the past 3 years, increasingly elaborate attempts by Richard Hawthorne to manage the one aspect of his daughter's life she refused to let him near. Richard Hawthorne was 71, a former senator, now a partner at a K Street lobbying firm whose specific operations Evelyn had long since stopped asking about. He was tall, still fit, with white hair and a handshake that had been precisely calibrated over 50 years to communicate authority without aggression. He loved Evelyn with the totality that occasionally expressed itself in ways that looked like control. And she had spent enough time in therapy to understand that distinction and still find it exhausting. The Delacroix son, Evelyn had mentally been calling him the fintech before she even arrived, was named Carter, and he was 34. And he had the particular energy of a man who had spent the past 18 months on a post-exit victory lap and hadn't yet figured out what came next. He was handsome in a generic way. He asked good questions about Hawthorne Technologies' infrastructure play in Southeast Asia. "You must be looking at ASEAN policy pretty carefully," he said, over the salmon course. "The data localization requirements are going to be interesting." "We have a team on it," Evelyn said. "I was thinking about getting into that space, actually. After the exit, I have some capital to deploy." He looked at her with the openness of someone who thought openness was the same as honesty. "I actually think someone like you, with the platform you've built, could be a real—" "What do you do for fun?" Evelyn asked. He paused. "Sorry?" "Outside of work. Capital deployment. Business. What do you do?" He thought about it in a way that suggested the question surprised him. "I've been doing some angel investing, which is more interesting than people think. That's still work. I golf." "Do you like it?" "I like the networking." Evelyn smiled, and it did not reach her eyes, and Richard Hawthorne, who had been watching this from the far end of the table, refilled his wine glass. After Carter left, after the housekeeper had cleared the plates and Richard's assistant had discreetly handed him a stack of briefing notes. He would pretend he wasn't going to read immediately. Evelyn sat across from her father in the study while he poured scotch he didn't offer her and she declined to ask for. "He's a good man," Richard said. "He seems fine." "Fine." He repeated the word like he was examining it for damage. "Evelyn?" "Dad, you're 30 years old." "I'm aware. I'm not trying to push you." He said this in the tone of a man who was, in fact, trying to push her. "I'm saying that I look at you and I see someone who is extraordinary at everything she attempts, and I'm watching you choose to be alone, and I—" He stopped. He turned the glass in his hands. "I worry." "You worry about the business all the time. You don't seem to lose sleep over that." "The business can run without you if something happens to you." His voice was quieter now. "A family can't." She looked at him for a long moment. "The men you've introduced me to," she said, "in the last 2 years, what did they have in common?" He waited. They all looked at the chair before they looked at me, and then they spent the rest of the evening trying not to look at it again. Like if they pretended hard enough it wasn't there, they'd get credit for not minding. She kept her voice level. "I don't need someone who doesn't mind. I need someone who doesn't require that kind of active effort just to see me." Her father was quiet for a moment. "Has anyone managed that?" She thought about a coffee shop on Calloway Street, a ceramic mug, a man who'd looked at her directly without that flicker. "I'm going to head home," she said. "Early morning." She went back to Mercer's on Tuesday. She told herself it was proximity. She had a meeting at a law firm on Granville Street, which was close enough that Calloway made sense. She told herself it was the coffee. The Ethiopian had been genuinely good. She came in through the side door again. The shop was busier at mid-morning than it had been before, 4 of the 8 tables occupied, the espresso machine running. Logan was behind the counter. He looked up when she came in, and something registered in his expression. Recognition, easy rather than performed, and he lifted his chin in a small greeting. She took the same table. "Ethiopian again?" he said when he came over. "Is there something I should try instead?" He thought about it genuinely. "I just got a Costa Rican single origin in. It's lighter, honey process. If you're somewhere between the Ethiopian and something cleaner, I'll try it." It was better than the Ethiopian. She told him so when he refilled her water and he said, "I'll tell Daniel you've upgraded." And she said, "Daniel does the Costa Rican too?" And he said, "Daniel does everything I carry. We've been working together since—" He paused. "Since a while back. He's good people." There was something in that pause. She didn't push at it. "The girl who was here Thursday," she said. "Your daughter?" "Sophie." "Yeah." His expression changed slightly, in the way parents' expressions change when their kids are mentioned. Not soft exactly, just more present. "She's here mornings before school when I can't get coverage. She's pretty good about doing her work." "How old is she?" 7, going on 45. He said it the way people say true things. Evelyn smiled. It was an actual one, unguarded, and it seemed to catch him slightly off guard too, like he hadn't expected it. "You don't come through this part of the neighborhood much," he said, not accusatory, just observational, the way someone notes a change in weather. "I had a meeting Thursday and today." "Law firm on Granville?" "How did you know?" "They send me a lot of business, long depositions. People need coffee." He picked up her empty mug. "I'll get the refill." He left. She looked at the table for a moment, at the grain of the wood, at the coffee ring her cup had left. She was not a person who sat in coffee shops between meetings. She was not a person who had casual conversations with people she'd just met. She had colleagues. She had a small inner circle. She had her father and Marcus and her physical therapist Diane, who she'd been seeing for 18 months, and who had told her 6 months ago that she was emotionally armored in a way that was going to eventually cost her something she couldn't replace. Diane was frequently correct. It was one of Evelyn's least favorite things about her. When Logan came back with the refill, she was looking at her phone. He set the mug down and she said, without looking up, "You don't ask me about the company." He paused. "Should I?" "Most people do. Eventually. They find out who I am and then the conversation shifts." She put her phone down. "You haven't asked." "I know who you are," he said. She looked at him. "You were on the cover of Inc. a couple years back," he said. "I don't follow business press much, but it was in the waiting room at my daughter's pediatrician. The headline was something about the CEO who doesn't wait." He said it without irony, without deference. Just, "Here's the information," delivered plainly. "You were in a wheelchair in the photo. I remember thinking the headline was either really tone-deaf or really intentional." "It was intentional," she said. "I wrote it myself." "I figured." He picked up the empty water glass. "You want more water?" "Please." He came back with the water. He said, "I don't ask about the company because it doesn't seem like that's what you come in here to talk about." She was quiet for a moment. "You don't know what I come in here to talk about," she said. "This is the second time." "Fair?" He didn't argue it. "I'm just saying, you can, or you don't have to. Either way, the coffee's the same." He went back to the counter. She sat there for another 20 minutes, answered 2 emails, and did not think even once about the meeting she had in 45 minutes. It became a thing, not immediately, and not with any defined intention. That was the part she kept returning to, trying to find the moment where she could have made a different choice, could have not let it become a thing. But it was difficult to identify, because nothing about it was deliberate. She had meetings in that part of the city twice a week on average. Callaway Street was 3 minutes off the direct route. The coffee was exceptional, and the table near the side entrance had good lighting, and nobody bothered her. And Logan Mercer talked to her like a person. It was almost embarrassing how much that mattered. He argued with her, mildly, about her espresso preferences. He told her once, with zero apology, that she'd ordered wrong and then brought her something she hadn't asked for that turned out to be exactly right. When she mentioned in passing that she'd been reading about the supply chain consolidations happening in Asian manufacturing, he said he'd been watching the same thing from the perspective of his beans, that 2 of his primary suppliers had shifted port logistics twice in the past year, that the downstream effects on small importers were getting genuinely serious. And it was not a conversation she'd expected to have in a coffee shop, and it was not a conversation he was having to impress her. He was just a person who thought about the things that affected his business. One Thursday, 3 weeks after she'd first come in, Sophie was at the end of the counter again, and she looked up from her homework and said, across the cafe in the uncalibrated volume of a 7-year-old, "Dad, is that the lady who gives good tips?" The 2 customers at the nearest table looked up. Logan behind the counter said, "Sophie." "I'm just asking." Evelyn said, "Yes, that's me." Sophie considered this with the seriousness of someone evaluating a significant piece of data. She had her father's dark hair and what looked like her own particular version of his directness. Dad says tips should be for people who need them, but he says you're nice. Those can both be true, Evelyn said. Sophie appeared to find this satisfactory and returned to her homework. Logan came over with the pour-over and set it down and said quietly, "I'm sorry. She doesn't have a lot of filters." "Neither do I," Evelyn said. He smiled. It was a real one, not the polite professional version, but the kind that arrived slightly ahead of his permission for it. It changed his face. He looked younger with it, and also somehow more tired, like the smile showed all the effort that the neutral expression was covering. She thought about that smile later. At her desk at 7 p.m., working through a contract dispute with their Dublin office. She caught herself thinking about it and made a deliberate effort to stop. She called Diane instead. "I've been going to this coffee shop," she said. Diane waited. "The owner talks to me normally." "Normally?" "Like a person. Without the—" she searched for the word. "Without the accommodation. The whole thing where people are extra generous or extra careful because of the chair and the company and the 2 years of press coverage about how remarkable I am for not completely falling apart after the accident. And you notice this because it's unusual. Is that the only reason you notice it?" Evelyn was quiet. "He's a widower," she said. "Single father. He has a daughter who's 7. Diane didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Does he know who you are?" "He does. And he still talks to you like a person." "That's what I just said." "I'm not being redundant," Diane said. "I'm making sure you heard yourself." It was 4 weeks in when the thing happened that she should have anticipated but hadn't. She had a board meeting running long, moved her afternoon schedule, and arrived at Mercer's at 2:15, which was later than usual. The shop was quiet, the lunch rush gone, one couple at a window table, the college girl with the red glasses wiping down the counter. Logan was at a table near the back, a laptop open, a pile of what looked like invoices beside him, a mug going cold. He was wearing reading glasses she hadn't seen before. He looked up. "Didn't think you were coming today. I had a board meeting. How was it?" "Long." She came to a stop near the counter, realizing the girl wasn't at the register yet. "Someone will get me. Don't get up." "It's fine. I'll wait." Her voice was even. "Sit down. You're doing your books." He paused for a half-second, reading something in her tone that she hadn't intended to put there. Then he sat back down. The girl, her name was Priya, she'd learned, came out from the back and said, "Oh, hey, Ms. Hawthorne, one sec. Take your time." She ordered the Costa Rican. She took her usual table. Through the gap between shelves, she could see Logan back at his invoices, the pen moving, the reading glasses writing slightly low. He made a sound under his breath at something on the page, not frustration, just acknowledgement, and made a note. When Priya brought the coffee, she said quietly, "He's been at that for 2 hours. The supplier raised his prices and he's been trying to figure out if he can absorb it or if he has to pass it along. He really hates passing stuff along." Evelyn looked at her. "Sorry," Priya said. "I just thought, I don't know why I said that." "It's fine." It wasn't that she wanted to fix it. She had the resources to fix every financial problem Logan Mercer had ever had or would have, and she knew with certainty that the offer would be the end of whatever this was. That was not what caught at her. What caught at her was the image of him sitting there 2 hours into a problem he couldn't simply solve, holding on to the cost because he didn't want to pass it along to the people who came in here every morning. That particular form of stubbornness, the kind that chose difficulty rather than inconvenience someone else, was something she understood at a molecular level. She worked at her table for the better part of an hour. When she left, she stopped near his table. "Ethiopian," she said. He looked up. "For the menu. If you can source it at a price that works, the Ethiopian holds the higher price point without people feeling price gouged. They associate it with specialty. Costa Rican is excellent, but it's a mid-market signal. Ethiopian is a premium signal." He stared at her for a moment. "I'm not—" She paused. "I'm not trying to tell you your business." "No," he said slowly. That's a real thing." He leaned back. "You analyzed my menu positioning in the last hour." "I had time while I was waiting for a call to connect." "Sure." "I'm serious. The margins on specialty single origin are better than people think. The story element, The roaster's relationship with the cooperative, all of that, adds value that commodity pricing doesn't capture. You've thought about this. I think about everything. She said it without pride. It came out as the plainest possible statement of fact. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Not amused, or not just amused, something more attentive than that. Thank you, he said. Don't mention it. She was almost at the side door when he said behind her, Hawthorne. She stopped. Your father's right, you know. She turned around slowly. He was still at his table, reading, glasses still on, looking at her with that same level attention. About what? She said. About someone who sees you, not the rest of it. He said it the way he said most things, directly, without decoration, without the flinch of someone who was aware they were crossing a line. You've been coming in here for a month, and every time you leave, you look like someone who just remembered they're not supposed to enjoy things. He paused. I don't know why I said that. You said it because you were thinking it. Yeah. He took his glasses off. Your coffee's on me today. It doesn't have to be. I know it doesn't have to be. He said it easily. It's $6. Just let it be a thing. She looked at him for a long moment. You don't need a husband, he said. You need someone who sees the woman before the wheelchair. She had been spoken about, spoken over, spoken for, and spoken of in the third person within arm's reach for 2 years. She had been called inspiring and remarkable and exceptional and brave in tones that turned her into a category. She had been on the cover of 4 magazines. She had been given a standing ovation at a technology conference in Singapore and managed to get to the restroom before she started shaking. She stood in the doorway of a coffee shop on Callaway Street, and she was, for perhaps the first time in 2 years, completely speechless. See you Thursday? He said. She left without answering. She sat in the car for 4 minutes before she told her driver to go. Cool. She called Diane at 9 that night. He said something, she said without preamble. Okay. It wasn't a grand gesture. He just said it, like it was obvious, like he was pointing out that the sky was blue. What did he say? She told her. Diane was quiet for a moment, then, how did it make you feel? Exposed, Evelyn said immediately. Then, and something else. And something else like what? She looked at the ceiling of her apartment, the high, white, architecturally perfect ceiling of the penthouse she'd moved into 6 months after the accident because the previous place had stairs she'd refused to have modified because modifying them would mean admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. Like maybe, she said slowly, something is possible that I decided wasn't. Diane waited. Which is terrifying, Evelyn said. Of course it is, Diane said. It's supposed to be. Evelyn lay in the dark of her apartment, the city spread below the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her company 40 floors down in the building across the street, all $4.2 billion of what she'd built humming quietly in its servers and contracts and satellite offices. She thought about a man at a table with reading glasses and a pile of invoices and coffee going cold. She thought, I don't know how to do this. And underneath that, quieter. I want to try. She didn't go back on Thursday. She had reasons. A real one, actually, a last-minute call from their legal team about a patent dispute that pushed her entire afternoon into the evening, and by the time it was resolved, she was in the back of a car, heading home with a headache and a cold cup of tea and no appetite for anything except silence. She told herself that was the reason. She was mostly right. She didn't go back the following Tuesday either. That reason was less clean. The meeting she had near Granville Street got moved to a video call, which removed the geographic logic. And without the geographic logic, she would have been going to Callaway Street for no reason, except that she wanted to, and she wasn't ready to want to without a reason. Marcus noticed something on Wednesday. They were going through the quarterly staffing review, a 2-hour process that involved a lot of spreadsheets and a handful of difficult personnel decisions, and Evelyn was present for all of it, answering questions, making calls, nothing missed. But at one point, Marcus looked up from the projection screen and said, Where are you right now? She looked at him. I'm here. You're here, he agreed, but you're also somewhere else. I'm thinking about the Vantara integration. You settled the Vantara integration last week. She was quiet. Marcus, who had worked with her for 4 years and had exactly one photograph on his desk, his wife, his 2 daughters, and a Labrador with a cone around its neck, said simply, "You okay?" "I'm fine." Fine like actually fine, or fine like you've decided everything is under control and you don't want to discuss it? The second one. He nodded slowly. Okay. He went back to the spreadsheet. The Vantara integration really is settled, just so you know. She went to Mercer's the next morning. It was a Friday, which was not her usual day, and she arrived earlier than she'd come before. 7:45, the shop barely 30 minutes past its opening, the morning crowd thinner and quieter. Logan was behind the counter. When she came through the side door, he looked up, and the look lasted half a second longer than a simple recognition glance. There was something in it, an assessment she couldn't entirely read, and then it was just a greeting. "You've been gone a while," he said. "I had a complicated week." "2 of them, actually." She paused. He'd counted. She didn't know what to do with that, so she filed it and moved on. "Is the Costa Rican still on?" "It is. I also got a new natural process from a farm in Burundi. It's weird in a good way." "Weird how?" "Tastes a little like stone fruit. Not obviously, but it's there. Some people find it distracting. I think it's interesting." "I'll try it." He brought it over himself rather than sending Priya. He set it down and said, "Stone fruit's in the back of the finish. Give it a second." She gave it a second. He was still standing at the edge of the table, not waiting exactly, just present. "There it is," she said. "Yeah. It's good." He went back behind the counter. She opened her laptop. The morning was quiet and gray outside, the windows running with a thin drizzle, and the shop smelled like roasted coffee and something warm from the kitchen. Pastry, she thought, or maybe bread. There was a different person at the end of the counter today, not Sophie. "She's at school?" Evelyn asked when Logan came over to check on the coffee. "Monday through Friday," he said, "since September. She loves it, which surprised me. She was nervous before it started, didn't sleep well the week before." He said this in the way of someone recalling a specific worry that had resolved, still holding the echo of it. "Turns out she just needed to find one friend, and after that she was fine. It's always one friend, I think. For kids. For everyone." She looked at him briefly, then at her laptop. "What about you? Is there someone who covers the shop when she needs you?" "Priya opens Tuesday through Friday. My neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, she's 73 and treats Sophie like a personal project. She does after school on the days I can't close early." He leaned against the counter edge behind him, arms crossed, not formally, just comfortable. "We have a system. It took a while to get it right." "What does that mean, a while?" He considered the question like it was worth considering. The first year after her mother died, I was making it up as I went. Sophie was 4. 4-year-olds they're relentless, in a good way, because they don't really have the capacity to let you stay still in your grief. She needed things constantly. Breakfast, bath, someone to sit with her while she fell asleep. Someone there when she woke up scared. He paused. That was actually, I think, what kept me functional that year, having to show up for her. The cafe was quiet around them. The drizzle outside had shifted into something steadier. "I'm sorry about your wife," Evelyn said. He nodded once. "Thank you." It didn't have the quality of a conversational close. It had the quality of someone acknowledging something that was genuinely hard to acknowledge, and then choosing to continue to sit with the person who'd said it rather than change the subject. "What was her name?" Evelyn asked. "Claire." He said it the way you say a name you've said many thousands of times and haven't found a way to make smaller. Claire Ann Mercer. She was a landscape architect. She was incredibly precise about everything except punctuality. She was always late. A small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Sophie does the same thing. Drives me insane, and it's also, I can't bring myself to actually push back on it the way I should. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. How long was she sick? 14 months from diagnosis. He said it without effect, which was the particular tone of a number that had been examined until it no longer surprised you. Glioblastoma. It's a brain tumor. Aggressive. The treatment options... He stopped. There were options. We pursued them. They didn't change the outcome. I'm sorry, she said again, because it was the only honest thing. I know. He looked at her. How did the accident happen? If that's... You don't have to. She hadn't expected the reciprocation and found herself without a prepared response, which almost never happened. Car accident, she said. 2 years ago. I was coming back from a board dinner, late, and a truck ran a red on the intersection and hit the passenger side where I was sitting. She kept her voice even. Complete spinal injury at T12. The doctors were quite honest, which I respected more than I expected to. No recovery of function below the injury. That's the permanent condition. He looked at her steadily. That's a lot to absorb. It was. And you went back to work. 8 weeks later. She saw his expression. I know how that sounds. It sounds like you needed something that was yours. She stopped. That's what it sounds like, he said simply, not elaborating it, not making it into a lesson. Just, here's what I heard. The morning drizzle thinned to mist outside. Priya was running a cloth over the far counter. Somewhere behind the kitchen door, something beeped. Evelyn sat with her coffee and her laptop, and the strange absence of the particular loneliness she usually carried into rooms. She stayed for 2 hours. The investigating was not something she was proud of. She told herself it was due diligence, that she was a person who operated on information, who made decisions based on verified data, and that what she was feeling was the kind of thing that required context. She told Diane the same thing, on the phone, on a Sunday night, and Diane said, "You're researching him." And Evelyn said, "I'm gathering context." And Diane said, "Evelyn." And Evelyn said, "I know." She had Marcus pull background through their standard vendor screening process, which she told him was related to a potential supply chain partnership, a lie Marcus accepted with the quiet understanding of someone who knew she would tell him the full truth eventually. What the screening returned was Logan James Mercer, 32, no criminal record, no outstanding litigation, no financial red flags, single, one dependent, previous business registration in the state of Virginia. The Virginia registration was where it got interesting. She dug further herself because there were limits to what she was willing to ask Marcus to find. What she found, over 2 evenings with legal databases and archived press from a business journal she subscribed to, was a company called Veritas Logic, co-founded 7 years ago by Logan Mercer and a software engineer named Daniel Park, who, she realized with a jolt, was the same Daniel who roasted Logan's coffee, the same Daniel who'd been working with the same cooperative for 6 years. Veritas Logic had built compliance automation software for mid-size financial institutions, a niche that sounded dry until you looked at the numbers, which told a different story. Seed funding of $4 million. Series A at 22. A growth trajectory that had the financial press, briefly, calling it one of the more quietly impressive enterprise software builds of that period. At the time Logan had left the company, the last independent valuation had the firm at somewhere between $85 and $92 million. He had owned 38%. He had transferred his shares. Not sold. Transferred. To Daniel Park, his co-founder, and to a legal instrument she traced through 2 corporate filings before she found what it was. An irrevocable trust set up in Sophie Mercer's name, structured so the disbursement didn't begin until she turned 25. An education provision was built in separately, accessible from 18. He had given up 38% of a $90 million company. He had kept nothing for himself that she could find. He had opened a coffee shop. She sat with this for a long time. She went to Mercer's on a Tuesday. She came through the side door. Logan was training a new hire at the espresso machine, a young man who kept over-extracting, and Logan was patient about it in the particular way of someone who had corrected the same mistake many times without making the person feel stupid for it. He saw Evelyn, lifted a finger, 1 minute, and finished the demonstration before he came over to her table. "Burundi again?" he said. "Please." She waited until he sat down across from her, which he did sometimes now when the shop was slow, with his own coffee, and there was nothing remarkable about it anymore. It was simply a thing that happened. "Can I ask you something that might be considered intrusive?" He considered. "Probably." "Why the coffee shop?" Something moved in his face. A brief recalibration. Why not the coffee shop? That's not an answer. I know. He turned his mug on the table. The mug was chipped on one side. She'd noticed that before, that he used the same chipped mug every time. The business I had before, the software company. When Claire got sick, I stepped back. There wasn't a choice about it, not really. She needed someone there, fully there, and I had a co-founder who was capable and a team that was solid, and I thought, I'll come back to it after. He paused. There was no after, not the kind I'd meant. By the end, I didn't want to go back to it. The whole world that company existed in, the funding rounds and the growth metrics and the pitch decks, it felt like it belonged to a version of me that didn't exist anymore. So you started over. I started smaller. He corrected it precisely. There's a difference. I wasn't trying to start over. I wanted something I could control end to end, something where I could see the whole thing and be responsible for the whole thing. And I wanted something Sophie could grow up around without it feeling like her father was always somewhere else. Evelyn looked at him. That's not a small thing. No. He said it without false modesty. It's not. The company, Veritas Logic, it's still operating. He didn't look surprised that she knew. Daniel runs it. He's good. Better than me at the operational side of things, honestly. A pause. He still gives me coffee at cost, which is... He made a small gesture that meant, that's how friendship works between people who've been through something. You kept nothing? He was quiet for a moment. Sophie has what she needs. That was the point. He looked at her directly. Is this the part where you tell me I made a bad financial decision? No, she said. It's the part where I'm trying to understand who you are. He held her gaze. That takes longer than a morning. I know. She picked up her coffee. I'm not in a hurry. He studied her for a moment, and the thing she'd noticed about him, the thing that was different from most people who sat across from her in any context, was that he didn't seem to be calculating. There was no performance in his attention. He was just looking at her, trying to see her, which was such a simple thing and so thoroughly uncommon that it kept catching her off guard. You're trying to decide if I'm real, he said. She didn't deny it. That's fair, he said. Most people in your position would do the same thing. My position. Billionaire CEO who's been managing people's perceptions of her for years. He said it without edge. Who's learned to read whether someone wants something from her before she lets them get close. It makes sense that you'd... Check. He paused. I'm not offended by it. I didn't ask if you were offended. No, but you were waiting to see if I was. She had been. She was slightly unsettled by how accurately he'd read it. Daniel told me about you, by the way, Logan said. She stilled. Not in a... He wasn't gossiping. He saw your name on an invoice receipt once, after you'd been here a few times, and he mentioned it. He said you were smart and that you were one of the few people in enterprise software who'd actually understood what Veritas was trying to do before anyone else in the market did. Logan turned his mug again. He has a lot of opinions about the software industry for a guy who now mostly talks about soil pH and fermentation. That's what happens when you give someone your life's work, Evelyn said. They get to have opinions about it forever. Logan laughed. It was a full one, unexpected, and it changed the entire character of the room. That is exactly what it's like. She found herself laughing too. Genuinely, briefly, the kind that doesn't announce itself in advance. In the long quiet that followed, the rain returned to the windows, lighter this time. The new hire had pulled a shot that was at least close to correct, and Logan made a small approving gesture in his direction without looking away from Evelyn. It was completely natural, that multitasking, like someone who had learned to hold several things at once and had stopped finding it remarkable. She thought, I want to come back here tomorrow. She thought, I'm in trouble. The shift happened on a Thursday afternoon in October, when Sophie's school had a half day, and Logan hadn't been able to get Mrs. Okafor, and Sophie spent the afternoon at the shop doing homework and periodically delivering pastries to occupied tables with tremendous seriousness. Evelyn had come in late, around 3, after a meeting that had run long and left her with the particular thin patience of someone who'd been diplomatic for 4 hours straight. She was tired. She wasn't hiding it well, She came through the side door and went straight to her table and sat down and looked at her phone and did not immediately want coffee or conversation. Sophie arrived at her table approximately 90 seconds later. "Would you like a scone?" Sophie said. She was holding a small plate with two of them, her expression the expression of someone taking their job seriously. "Dad made them this morning. They're lemon." "I'm okay, thank you." "They're really good." A pause. "He only makes them sometimes." Evelyn looked at the scones, then at Sophie, who had her father's directness but with none of the calibration. She just looked back, open, waiting. "Okay," Evelyn said. "I'll try one." Sophie set the plate down with a small air of mission accomplished, and then instead of leaving, pulled out the chair across from Evelyn and sat in it. Evelyn blinked. "You're Miss Hawthorne," Sophie said. "You can call me Evelyn." Sophie considered this. "Dad calls you Hawthorne." "He does." "Why?" "I'm not sure. It's just what happened." Sophie seemed to accept this as a reasonable origin story for a thing. She put her elbows on the table, a habit her father had clearly not managed to correct yet, and said, "You have a cool chair." Evelyn had heard this from adults in the way adults say things that they think children say, with a brightness that was really just discomfort dressed up. From Sophie, it was just a factual observation about a chair. "Thank you," Evelyn said. "Can it go fast?" "It can. I don't usually in here." "Because of the tables?" "Mostly." Sophie nodded, satisfied with the engineering logic. "My friend at school, Maya, her grandma has one. Hers has a joystick." She said it with the quiet authority of someone cataloging chair varieties. "Yours looks different, more like a sports thing." "That's basically what it is. I had it made." "Custom?" "Custom." Sophie's eyes went slightly wider. "Like how people get custom shoes?" "More or less." "That's really cool." And she meant it, simply and completely, without the layer of self-consciousness that adults wrapped around the same sentiment. She said it the way she might say that a particularly interesting cloud formation was really cool. It was just true. Logan appeared at the edge of the table. He looked at Sophie, then at Evelyn, then at the plate. "Sophie, she said I could sit." "That doesn't mean you get to—" "It's fine," Evelyn said. "She's told me important things about chair varieties." Logan studied his daughter for a moment with an expression that was trying to be firm and losing. 5 more minutes, and then homework." "I'm almost done." "That's not—" "Okay, 5 minutes." He went back to the counter. Sophie returned her attention to Evelyn. "Are you his girlfriend?" Sophie asked. The cafe was, mercifully, not very full. The couple by the window appeared absorbed in their laptops. "No," Evelyn said steadily. Sophie thought about this. "He doesn't have a girlfriend. He just has Mrs. Okafor, and she's old. And Daniel, but Daniel talks too much about coffee." She paused. "And me." "That sounds like a pretty full life," Evelyn said. "It's okay." Sophie glanced toward the counter, checking, Evelyn realized, whether her father was listening, with the instinct of a child who had learned to modulate certain conversations by proximity. He was making something and not looking over. Sophie leaned in, just slightly. "He gets sad sometimes. At night. He thinks I don't know, but I can hear him in the kitchen when I'm supposed to be asleep." Evelyn kept her face still. "He loves you very much." "I know." There was nothing complicated in the way Sophie said it. It was just a fact, the most stable thing in her world, unquestioned. "I just think—" She stopped. "He should have someone too." Evelyn said quietly, "Did you tell him that?" "I tried once. He said he was fine, but he makes that face when he says it." "What face?" Sophie made the face. It was a compressed, stoic, everything-is-managed face that bore a startling resemblance to one that Evelyn had been told she made herself. She sat back and looked at this 7-year-old who had her father's directness and her mother's, she guessed her mother's, absolute fearlessness in a conversation, and she felt something she didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even exactly tenderness, though it had that quality. It was more like recognition, the shape of people doing the best they can with what they have left. "Go finish your homework," Evelyn said gently. Sophie slid off the chair without argument. She was 3 steps away when she turned back. The scone's better with the coffee. The lemon does something. I'll try that. Okay. And she was off, climbing back onto her stool at the end of the counter, pulling her workbook toward her. Logan came over a few minutes later with the coffee she hadn't ordered. He set it down and looked at the scone plate, which she'd cleared, and said, "She talk your ear off?" "She's remarkable," Evelyn said. Something crossed his face. The involuntary kind of pride that hurts a little at the edges because you know exactly how much it costs to have something worth being proud of. "She is," he said. Then, "She didn't say anything weird, did she?" Evelyn looked at him. "She said you have a good scone recipe." He held her gaze for a moment, deciding whether he believed that was the whole summary. "I'll get you the recipe," he said finally. "I'd like that." He went back to work. Evelyn drank her coffee with the lemon scone and found that Sophie had been right about the combination. And she sat there in the warm, imperfect coffee shop in the October afternoon and did not check her phone for 45 minutes, which was the longest she'd gone in years. Quote, it was Marcus who finally said it out loud. They were in the car together after an event in Georgetown, a tech policy dinner that Evelyn had attended because the Secretary of Commerce had asked her to, which was not the kind of request you declined, and Marcus had had 2 glasses of wine, which did not make him loose so much as fractionally more honest than usual. "You're different lately," he said. "Different how?" "Less," he searched for it, "less sealed, if that makes sense." The car moved through Georgetown's evening traffic, the streets wet from rain. Evelyn looked out the window. "You're saying I was sealed before." "I'm saying you were managing a very specific kind of isolation and doing it well enough that it mostly looked like leadership." He paused. "Whatever's changed, it's working." She was quiet. "Is it someone?" he said. "Marcus. I'm asking as someone who cares about you, not as your CFO." "Those are the same person." "They're not, actually. The CFO thinks you're performing at an extremely high level and doesn't need anything to change. The person who's watched you work 14-hour days for 2 years and eat lunch at your desk and deflect every personal question with something that sounds like professionalism." He stopped. "That person thinks you deserve something normal, something small and real." She didn't answer. The car turned onto Massachusetts Avenue. "It's someone," Marcus said, without heat, just acknowledging what was already in the car with them. She looked at him. "He owns a coffee shop." Marcus processed this. "Okay." "He has a 7-year-old daughter. He's a widower. He used to co-found software companies and gave up most of it when his wife was sick." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Does he know who you are?" "He knew before I told him. And he talks to me like a person." She said it the same way she'd said it to Diane, but hearing it again in the car, with Marcus's expression doing something careful and careful trying not to show it, she heard it for what it actually was. Not a small thing. The thing. "That's not nothing," Marcus said. "No." She turned back to the window. "It's not." The city moved past. Somewhere in the direction of Calloway Street, a man was closing a coffee shop for the night, wiping down the counter, checking the roast notes for tomorrow, maybe going home to put his daughter to bed and then sitting alone in his kitchen with the sound of it. She thought about what Sophie had said. He should have someone too. She thought about a chipped mug and reading glasses, and the way he'd looked at her in the doorway 2 months ago and said something true without apologizing for it. She thought, this is the part where I have to decide whether I'm brave enough. She had built $4.2 billion and crossed every room that tried to stop her. She was terrified. She was, for the first time in 2 years, awake. The first time Logan came to her building, it wasn't planned. She had mentioned on a Tuesday in late October that she was working through a restructuring proposal that was giving her trouble. Not the numbers were fine, but the human architecture of it, who reported to whom after the merger, what the new org chart did to people who had been with Hawthorne Technologies since the early days. She was trying to write the internal announcement and finding that every version of it sounded either clinical or falsely warm, and neither worked. He had said without making it a gesture, sometimes it helps to talk it through with someone who doesn't have a stake in it. She had looked at him. You don't have time for that. I close at 5 on Tuesdays. She hadn't intended it to turn into an invitation. But at 6:15 that evening, her driver pulled up to Mercer's, and Logan came out the front door in a jacket instead of an apron, and Sophie was already at Mrs. Okafor's, and they went to a restaurant 3 blocks away that had good food and no dress code, and the kind of noise level that made a private conversation feel possible without feeling staged. He ordered the least expensive thing on the menu. She noticed and said nothing about it. She talked through the restructuring problem. He asked questions that were not the questions she expected, not about the financial structure, but about the people. Specifically, which ones would feel the change as a demotion, versus which ones would feel it as a reorientation, and why that difference mattered. He had run a company. He knew what happened to organizations at the level of individuals rather than org charts. His questions were useful. By the end of the meal, she'd found the frame for the announcement that had been eluding her for 3 days. "That's what you needed," he said. "Someone to talk at. Someone to talk at who occasionally pushes back." He took a drink of his water. "You think out loud better than almost anyone I've met. You just need the friction. My board provides friction. Your board provides opposition. That's different. Opposition is people with stakes. Friction is just resistance for the sake of clarity." He turned his glass on the table. "Different thing." She looked at him across the table in the restaurant noise and thought, this man is smart in a way that doesn't require you to know it right away. It arrives incrementally, with no announcement. They stayed 2 hours. When they walked out, she in her chair, him adjusting his pace without any visible awareness that he was doing it, she turned toward where her car was waiting, and he turned the other direction toward the parking garage. And for a moment, they stood on the sidewalk in the cold November air, and there was a quality to the pause that both of them could feel. "Thank you," she said, "for the thinking partnership." "Any time." He meant it without weight. "Let me know how the announcement lands." He walked toward the garage. She watched him for a moment before she turned toward the car. Her driver, a man named Terrence, who had been with her for 3 years and communicated almost entirely in silence, said nothing. But she caught him not looking at her in the rear-view mirror in a way that indicated he had opinions he was professionally declining to share. "Not a word," she said. "Didn't say anything," Terrence said. "Bust some." She called Diane that night and said, "I think I'm falling for him." And Diane said, "I know." And Evelyn said, "I haven't done this since before the accident." And Diane said, "I know." And Evelyn said, "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with the fear." And Diane said, "You live with it. You don't let it make your decisions." It was simple advice. It was also the hardest kind. What she found, over the weeks that followed, was that the fear had 2 distinct components, and they were almost opposite in character. The first was the ordinary fear of vulnerability, of letting someone see the inside of her life, the penthouse that was beautiful and almost empty. The evening she spent working because work was the one thing that still felt fully hers. The fear that if he saw all of it, he would understand finally what the accident had taken from her that no amount of recovery could replace, and that understanding might look like pity, which she would not survive. The second fear was stranger. It was the fear that she would do this wrong, that she had spent so many years operating in a world of transactions and leverage and managed impressions that she no longer knew how to simply be someone's person, how to be soft in the right places, how to show up without an agenda, without the instinct to protect herself in advance. She mentioned this to Logan directly, one morning in late November, sitting at her table with the Burundi and the rain outside, because she had gotten to the point where she said things to him that she normally didn't say out loud. "I haven't been in a relationship in a long time," she said. "Not since before the accident." He was across the table, his chipped mug in hand, the shop quiet around them. He didn't fill the space with reassurance. "I know I'm—" She stopped. "I'm not easy. I'm aware of that. I work too much, and I trust slowly, and I'm not good at letting things be uncertain when I could theoretically resolve them." "Those aren't fatal flaws," he said. "They're not nothing." "No." He considered. "I'm not easy either. I carry Claire with me. That doesn't go away. Sophie sees it sometimes, and she doesn't say anything, but she knows. And that's its own kind of weight." He paused. "And I'm not a billionaire, Hawthorne. I own a coffee shop. I drive a 6-year-old Honda. I don't go to the kind of places you go or know the kind of people you know. That gap is real. I don't care about the gap. You don't, he said, but other people will. She knew exactly who he meant. My father, she said. I don't know your father. He'll have opinions about you. I imagine he will. Logan said it without particular concern. What kind of man is he? She thought about how to answer honestly. He loves me more than anyone alive, she said, and he expresses that love by trying to manage circumstances he's afraid of. The accident scared him badly. The idea that I might end up with someone who wants the company, or the name, or the money. She stopped. He's been testing every man I've met for 2 years. You won't be exempt from that. I wouldn't expect to be. He'll offer you things, she said. He does it to see how people respond. Board positions, introductions. He'll make it seem casual, and it won't be. Logan was quiet for a moment. What do you want me to do with that? I want you to be exactly what you are. He looked at her. That's what I was planning. She believed him. That was the thing. She believed him without the reservation she applied to almost every other statement anyone made to her, and she didn't entirely know what to do with that degree of ease. I want you to meet him, she said. Not yet, but eventually. I want you to know what you're walking into. Okay, he said it simply. Not bravely, not with any performance of courage, just, okay. As if it were a logistics question. She looked at him across the table. You're not worried. I'm a little worried, he said. I just don't think worrying in advance is useful. I worry in advance constantly. It's how I prevented 9/10 of the problems I've ever had. And the 10th? She was quiet. The 10th is the thing that gets you anyway, he said, not unkindly. The truck that runs the red light. She sat with that for a moment. Yeah, she said. She told him 2 weeks before she told her father, which felt like the right order and also like the most terrifying one. She came into the shop on a Tuesday morning, early, before the other tables had filled, and she sat down and looked at him when he brought the coffee and said, I want to try this. Whatever this is, I want to try it properly. He set the coffee down. He looked at her. I know what I am, she said. I know what it means to be attached to my life. The scrutiny and the complications and my father and the... She stopped, gathered the thread. I'm not asking you to want any of that. I'm asking you if you want me, separately from all of it. The cafe was quiet. Priya was doing something in the back. Logan pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, which he sometimes did and which she had never been able to fully predict. He put his elbows on the table, the same habit Sophie had, she'd noticed months ago, and he looked at her with the full attention he gave things when he was being serious. I've been watching you for 4 months, he said, and you've been watching me, and neither one of us has been pretending. He paused. I want to try. I want to do it carefully because I have Sophie to think about. And you have. Everything you have. But yes, that's my answer. She had expected him to add qualifications. He didn't. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They looked at each other and neither of them smiled right away because it wasn't a light thing and they both knew it. It was the kind of beginning that already had weight to it. Not bad weight, just the weight of people who had both already lost things and knew the cost of what they were starting. Then he said, The Costa Rican today. I got a new batch. Is it better than the last one? Different, you tell me. She told her father on a Sunday. She came to the dinner specifically for that purpose, arrived early before Carter Delacroix or anyone else could be invited, and sat across from Richard Hawthorne in the study with its scotch and its briefing notes, and she said, I've been seeing someone. Richard set down his glass. His name is Logan Mercer. He's 32. He owns a coffee shop on Callaway Street. He's a widower with a 7-year-old daughter. She kept her voice even, which required actual effort. He's intelligent, and he's kind, and he talks to me like a person, and I would like you to meet him. Her father was quiet for a long time. The study clock measured it. A coffee shop, Richard said. Yes. Evelyn? I know what you're going to say. I don't think you do. He picked up his glass again, turned it. I'm going to say, how did he respond when he found out who you are? She had not expected that question to be the first one. He already knew.
And? And nothing. He talked to me the same way he had been. That could mean he's very good at not showing what he wants. It could. She held her father's gaze. Or it could mean he genuinely doesn't want what you think he wants. Every man wants something. I want something too, Dad. Her voice came out more direct than she'd planned. I want to feel like myself again. I want to spend time with someone who sees me before the chair and the company and the Forbes cover. I want... She stopped. I want what you had with Mom, before she got sick, that specific thing. And I know that's an enormous thing to want, and I know it might not work, and I know there are 100 ways it could go wrong, but he's the first person in 2 years who has made me want to try. Her father looked at her for a long moment. She saw the calculation moving behind his eyes, the risk assessment, the scenario planning, the particular love that expressed itself as anticipatory management. And then she saw something else, the father rather than the strategist, the man who had sat beside a hospital bed 2 years ago and held his daughter's hand while she learned she would never walk again, who had watched her rebuild herself with a will that sometimes frightened him because it left no room for softness. "Bring him to dinner," Richard said. "Not yet. He's not... I'm not asking to interrogate him. I'm asking to meet him." A pause. "Like a person." She studied her father. "That's exactly what I told him you wouldn't do." "Give me some credit, Evelyn." "I give you credit for many things. Restraint at the dinner table is not historically one of them." He didn't argue, because he couldn't. Okay. The dinner was on a Saturday in mid-December, and Logan arrived at the Chevy Chase house in his own car, the 6-year-old Honda, and rang the front bell, and the housekeeper showed him to the sitting room where Evelyn was waiting, and he came in without the overdressed performance she'd half expected and without the deflating underdress she'd half feared. He was wearing a dark blue button-down and dark pants, and he looked like himself, which was what she'd asked for, and when he saw her, he came directly to her without scanning the room first and said quietly, "How are you doing?" "I'm fine." "Fine, like, actually fine." "Fine like I'm managing." She almost smiled. "Fair warning, he's going to be pleasant for approximately 45 minutes before the questions start." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that sound like conversation and aren't." Logan glanced around the room, taking in the size of it, the art, the accumulated evidence of serious money and serious taste, and she watched him notice it all and not be particularly rattled by it. "Noted," he said. Richard Hawthorne entered the room with the timing of a man who had always understood that an entrance was partly about when you chose to make it. He was dressed casually by his standards, no tie, a blazer that probably cost more than Logan's car, which Evelyn noted and let go. He crossed the room with his hand extended, and Richard Hawthorne's handshake, which had been calibrated over 50 years, met Logan's, and Evelyn watched her father take the measure of it. "Logan Mercer," Richard said. "I've heard a good deal about you." "I hope it was roughly accurate," Logan said, "that I haven't established yet." He smiled. "Drink? I have a reasonable scotch." "Water's fine. I'm driving." Richard's eyes moved to Evelyn briefly, and she read the note in them. He's making no effort to impress me. And then returned to Logan with the same pleasant expression. Dinner was a standing rib roast, which was either the housekeeper's default for important guests or a deliberate statement about abundance. And the conversation moved for the first 45 minutes exactly as Evelyn had predicted. Comfortable territory, thoughtful back and forth about the city, about the neighborhood Logan's shop was in, about Sophie and the way parents and grandparents ask about children they haven't met, with Richard asking questions that were generous in tone and genuinely curious. Then between the main course and dessert, Richard said, "I looked into your company, the software firm you founded." Logan didn't flinch. Veritas Logic. "Impressive trajectory. You left during what most people would consider the most important growth period." "I did." "Was that a difficult decision?" "It wasn't a decision," Logan said. "My wife was dying. I chose to be there." Richard held his gaze. Some men would have found a way to do both. Some men would have told themselves that. Logan said it without heat. I was one of them, for about 2 months. Then I understood that I was telling myself a story that let me avoid being in the room, so I stopped. The table was quiet. Richard looked at his daughter, briefly. Something moved in his expression. Something that was close to surprise. "The shares," Richard said.
You transferred them. To my co-founder and to a trust for my daughter. That's an unusual arrangement. Claire and I had talked about what we wanted for Sophie. I was following through on that. You didn't keep anything for yourself. I have the shop. I have the building I rent, which I've been buying out gradually. It's enough. Logan turned his water glass, a gesture that looked, suddenly, identical to the way Evelyn sometimes turned her own glass. She hadn't noticed that before. Mr. Hawthorne, I understand that my financial position relative to your daughter's is something you're concerned about. I'd find it strange if you weren't. Richard waited. I'm not interested in Hawthorne Technologies or any part of it, Logan said. I'm not interested in positions or opportunities or introductions. I understand that saying so costs nothing, and you have no particular reason to believe me. He paused. I can only tell you that what I want is your daughter, the specific person she is, which I would want if she ran a coffee shop and I ran a corporation, because that's not what this is about. The dining room clock moved through its small, measured sounds. She told you I'd offer things, Richard said. She did. And you prepared that response. I thought about what was true, Logan said, and then I said it. Richard Hawthorne looked at this man for a long moment. The man who had sat at his table and eaten the food and drunk the water and refused to be managed, who had answered every question without performance and without apology, who had looked at his daughter from the moment he walked in with an attention that Richard recognized, from a long time ago, as the specific attention of someone who was afraid of losing what they'd found. He looked at Evelyn. She looked back at her father with the face of a woman who had made her decision and was not asking for approval, and would appreciate very much if approval was coming anyway. Richard Hawthorne, who had survived decades of people trying to handle him, picked up his dessert fork and said, The shop on Callaway. Do you do private orders? Logan blinked slightly. For events? I have a firm dinner in January, 40 people. The catering handles the meal, but the coffee afterward is always terrible and no one wants to say so. I can do that, Logan said. Good. Richard looked down at his plate, then back up. I'll have my assistant reach out. It was not a surrender. Richard Hawthorne didn't surrender, but it was the specific sound of a man recalibrating, taking new information in and adjusting the architecture around it. And Evelyn, who had known her father for 30 years, recognized it for what it was. She let out a breath she'd been holding for approximately 2 hours. After dinner, when Richard had drifted toward his study with his briefing notes and Evelyn and Logan were in the hallway, while Terrence brought the car around, Logan said, How did that go? Better than it usually does. He's a hard man to read. He's a very easy man to read, she said. You have to know the code. She looked at him. He offered you business. That's the code. If he was going to shut you out, he would have been warmer at dinner, and then nothing would have come of the evening. Logan processed this. He offers business to people he respects. He offers business to people he's decided aren't a threat. There's a difference? For my father, she said, those are the same category. The car appeared at the end of the drive. Logan walked beside her toward it, and at the door he held it open, not in a way that took over, just in the natural way of someone who was nearby, and it made sense. And she looked up at him in the cold December dark and said, Thank you for tonight. I ate a very good rib roast, he said. I should be thanking you. I'm serious. So am I. He looked at her. He loves you. He's just afraid for you. Those are hard to separate. She thought of her father's face across the dinner table, the moment he'd recalibrated. He doesn't love easily, she said. Most people who love hard don't. Logan touched her face, just briefly, with his thumb along her jaw, the way you touch someone you're still learning, and then stepped back. I'll see you Tuesday. She watched him walk back to his car. The Honda started up, and she could see him through the windshield for a second, just a man in a car on a winter night, going home to relieve Mrs. Okafor and check on Sophie and do whatever the quiet of his evenings was. The kitchen, the coffee, going cold, the things he carried without putting them down. She got into her own car. Terrence did not say anything. She looked out the window at her father's house as they pulled away, and through the study window she could see the light on, her father at his desk. And as the car turned, she caught, just briefly, the particular set of his shoulders. Not the senator's shoulders. The father's. He was worried. He would always worry. But underneath it, In the code she'd spent 30 years learning to read, tonight it said, "I see what you see." That was enough. More than enough. She called Diane at 10:30. "He met my father," she said. "And?" "My father offered him catering business." Diane was quiet. Then, "That's his version of a blessing, isn't it?" "It is." "How do you feel?" She looked at the city passing outside the window. The lit windows, the December cold on the glass, the ordinary ongoing life of a million people who were afraid of things and doing them anyway. "Like maybe," she said slowly, "I don't have to be so careful all the time." "That's what it's supposed to feel like," Diane said. "It's terrifying." "Of course it is. You keep saying that because you keep expecting me to tell you the terror goes away." Diane's voice was warm and steady. "It doesn't go away. You just get bigger than it." Evelyn held the phone and looked at the city. She thought about a man with reading glasses and a chipped mug, a girl who talked about custom wheelchairs like they were cool sneakers, a dining room in Chevy Chase where her father had, in his particular compressed language, said something that sounded like yes. She thought, "I am bigger than this fear." She thought, "I have to be." She thought, "I think I am." The car moved through the December city, and for the first time in a long time, the dark outside the window did not look like something she was moving through alone. January arrived the way it always did in Washington, gray and without apology, the kind of cold that had no drama to it, just persistence. The firm dinner Richard had mentioned came through in the second week of the month. His assistant called Mercer's on a Wednesday, and Logan handled it the way he handled every logistical thing, quietly, without a production, mapping out what 40 people after a meal actually needed, which was not a full espresso service, but something warm and unhurried that gave them a reason to stay in their seats and keep talking. He brought Priya and the new hire, whose name was Joel and who had finally gotten his extraction times right, and he set up in the corner of the event space Richard's firm used in Georgetown and spent 2 hours doing what he did, which was make good coffee and stay out of the way of people who didn't need him. Richard found him near the end of the evening, ostensibly to thank him, and stood at the service table for 15 minutes in what looked like a casual conversation and was, Evelyn knew when Logan described it later, nothing of the sort. "He asked me about the shop's lease structure," Logan said. They were in her apartment. She'd started cooking on weekends badly, which Logan was helping with in the specific way of someone who was good at cooking and trying not to make you feel incompetent while he corrected every third thing you did. They were making pasta, which seemed forgiving as a dish and had proven less so than advertised. And then about whether I had expansion plans. And then he mentioned, entirely in passing, that he knew someone at a commercial real estate firm who dealt with restaurant and retail spaces. Evelyn handed him the wooden spoon. "He's offering you a connection." "I know. I thanked him and said the current space worked well for what I needed." "How did he take that?" "He said, 'Good man,' and went back to his table." Logan stirred the sauce with the authority of someone who had decided it needed more time. "That's a compliment, right? In your father's language." "That is a standing ovation in my father's language." Logan glanced at her. Something in his expression was amused, but underneath the amusement was the more serious thing. She could see him measuring the Richard Hawthorne situation, the way it fit into everything, and deciding it was stable. She liked that he did that. She liked that he didn't pretend the complexity wasn't there, and she liked even more that the complexity didn't stop him. "The pasta needs another 4 minutes," he said. "It's been 12 minutes. "Pasta doesn't care how long you think it's been." She leaned back against the counter. Her apartment was large and white and architecturally austere, and since December there had been small incursions against the austerity that she had not planned. A drawing Sophie had made, a purple house with a disproportionately large sun that was now held to the refrigerator with a magnet, a bag of the Burundi beans on the counter because Logan had started bringing them, a throw blanket on the living room couch that was yellow and entirely out of place with everything else in the room, and that she had bought because Sophie had said once that the apartment looked like a museum and museums were cold. It was a yellow blanket. It looked wrong. She hadn't moved it. "She asked me last week," Logan said, "if you were going to be around for a long time." Evelyn was quiet. "I told her I hoped so." He kept stirring. She said okay and went back to whatever she was drawing. 7-year-olds have a very efficient way of processing information. "What did you tell her about me? Before she met me?" I told her you were someone I had coffee with. He paused. And then I told her you were someone I had coffee with and also liked. And she said, oh, like a friend? And I said, yes, like a friend. And she thought about it and said, a friend or a girlfriend? And I said I wasn't sure yet, and she said, you should figure that out, Dad, it's confusing, and walked away. He took the pasta off the heat. She's not wrong. No, Evelyn said, she's usually not. She moved to the table while he plated the food, which she still wasn't proficient at, even with the adapted counter height they'd sorted out together over 3 Sundays. The first Sunday had been a minor disaster. Wrong pan, wrong heat, a sauce that separated. And Logan had not said anything helpful about it, only handed her a new pan and said, from the beginning, which was exactly the right response, and had made her mildly furious at the time and grateful later. They ate. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the January city was lit and gray, and she thought, as she had started to think with increasing frequency, that the apartment felt different now. Not transformed. She was not someone who transformed things with a feeling, and she distrusted that kind of language, but occupied differently. The space had been hers in a way that was really just solitary, the way you occupy a space you've never had to share. Now it was hers in a way that allowed for someone else in it, which was a different feeling entirely, and one she hadn't had in years. I want to ask you something, she said. He looked up. There's an event in March, a tech summit in Seattle. I'm speaking on the second day, which means I'm there for 2 nights. She paused. Sophie's on spring break that week. I thought, if you wanted, it could be a trip. For both of you. For all 3 of us. Logan was still. You've been thinking about this. I have. Evelyn, I know it's a step. I know it complicates things. You'd have to sort out the shop, and it's not... She stopped. I want you there. I want to be somewhere that isn't this city with both of you. That's the whole thought. It's not complicated. It's not uncomplicated. No. But simple things and easy things aren't the same. He looked at her for a long moment. Sophie's never been to Seattle. There's a good aquarium. She mentioned she likes fish. Very specifically, she told me the names of 4 sharks. She can name 9. A pause. She goes through phases. Right now it's sharks. Before that it was bridges. He turned his fork. You remember what she tells you. I pay attention. He was quiet. Yeah, he said. I know you do. He picked up his fork again. Let me look at the shop schedule. If Priya can manage the week with Joel, I think we can do it. She kept her voice level, because showing how much it meant, the simple yes of it, felt like more vulnerability than she was ready to expose at the dinner table. Okay. Okay. He pointed his fork at the pasta. This came out better. Don't be patronizing. I'm genuinely saying it. The timing was better. You held the heat right. She had held the heat right. I know, she said. I was watching the texture. He smiled. The real one. The one that arrived slightly ahead of his permission for it. She had stopped being surprised by how much she looked forward to that smile. The surprise had worn off, and what was left was just the fact of it, which was worse in the best possible way. The Seattle trip happened the way most real things happened. Not as planned, but close enough. Priya handled the shop. Joel turned out to be more capable than the early evidence had suggested. Mrs. Okafor, upon hearing there was to be a trip, declared that it was about time and helped Sophie pack with an enthusiasm that resulted in Sophie bringing 3 stuffed animals, 2 library books about sharks, and a rain jacket that was slightly too small but that she refused to leave behind because it was her favorite color, which was green. They flew on a Thursday. Sophie had the window seat because it was her first flight, and that was non-negotiable. And she spent the first 20 minutes of the flight with her face as close to the window as physics allowed, narrating to herself in a low, steady voice what she could see below. Logan read. Evelyn worked on her laptop reviewing her speaking notes for the second day, and every 20 minutes or so, Sophie would say something like, Dad, the river from up here looks like a scratch on the ground. And Logan would say, yeah? And Sophie would say, yeah, and that would be the whole exchange, both of them satisfied. At one point, Sophie turned away from the window and looked at Evelyn's laptop and said, What are you writing? Notes for a speech. What's the speech about? Technology, specifically about how large companies make decisions when they're moving into new markets. She paused, aware she'd made it sound like a sleep aid. About being brave enough to move before you know everything. Sophie considered this. Like how you have to jump in the pool even if you don't know if it's cold? Exactly like that. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and went back to her window. Logan, without looking up from his book, said quietly, "You're good with her." "She makes it easy." "She doesn't make it easy with everyone." He turned a page. "She likes you, specifically, not just because I like you." Evelyn looked at him. He was still reading, or appearing to read, the particular studied focus of someone who had said a thing and was giving the other person space to do what they wanted with it. She returned to her notes. But she held his words somewhere, the way you hold something that has weight and warmth. And she thought, this is what it is. This specific configuration of a man and his daughter, and a flight, and the ordinary ongoing life of it. This is the thing I was afraid of wanting. The aquarium was on the second day, after her panel, which had run long in the good way. The moderator was sharp, the questions were serious, and she'd said a few things she hadn't planned to say and meant all of them. She came out of the convention center into the gray Seattle afternoon, and Logan and Sophie were waiting at the bottom of the steps. Sophie in the too small green rain jacket, holding a pamphlet about Pacific coastal marine life that she'd apparently acquired from somewhere. "They have a great white shark here," Sophie announced. "A preserved one. Not alive, but real." "Let's go find it," Evelyn said. The aquarium was good. Sophie was relentless in the best sense, moving from tank to tank with a focus that was absolute, reading the information plaques with her lips moving slightly, asking Logan questions he sometimes knew the answer to and sometimes didn't, which she found acceptable as long as he admitted it rather than guessing. She held Evelyn's armrest for approximately 30 seconds near the giant Pacific octopus tank because she wanted Evelyn to be able to see the tank from the angle Sophie was seeing it from, and then she let go and moved on without treating the gesture as anything other than what it was. "Here is something worth seeing. Come see it." Evelyn stayed close to the glass of the octopus tank for a moment after Sophie had moved on. Logan stopped beside her. "You okay?" "She held my armrest," Evelyn said. "I know." "She didn't make anything of it." "No." He was quiet. "She thinks about accessibility more than most adults I know. She asked me once, after the first time she met you, why some buildings don't have ramps. I said it was because they were built before people thought carefully about it. She said, that seems like a thing they should fix. I said, yes. She said, why haven't they? And I said it was a good question, and she should keep asking it. Evelyn looked at the octopus moving slowly behind the glass. She's going to be extraordinary, she said. She already is, Logan said. I just have to not mess it up. You won't. You don't know that. No, but I've watched you with her for months. She turned to look at him. You're paying attention the right way. That's most of it. He looked back at her. The aquarium noise moved around them, families and children and the distant sound of water, and they stood in it together in the easy way of people who had stopped needing every silence to mean something. Evelyn, he said. Yeah, I love you. He said it the way he said most true things, directly, without decoration, not as a climax, but as a fact. I've been waiting to say it until it didn't feel like something that needed the right moment, but I think the right moment is just whenever it's true, so. She looked at him. The octopus moved behind the glass. Somewhere ahead, Sophie could be heard reading aloud from a plaque about kelp forest ecosystems. I love you too, she said. It came out level, which was not at all how it felt inside, where it had the quality of something that had been true for longer than she'd admitted and was now finally being given air. That's been true for a while. For me too. I know. You knew? I suspected. She turned back toward the tank because it was easier to say the next part to the glass. I was afraid to confirm it, because then it was real, and if it's real, it can be lost. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. I know that math. Does it get less like that? I don't know. It got less sharp over time. With Claire, the grief.
It got less sharp. He paused. But the awareness that things can be lost, I don't think that goes away. I think you just stop letting it be the loudest thing in the room. Sophie appeared at the end of the corridor, waving them forward. Come on, the sharks are this way, Logan called back. 1 minute, Soph. You said that before. I meant it then, too. Sophie made the specific sound of a child who has correctly identified an adult stalling and vanished around the corner. Logan looked at Evelyn. She looked at him. He offered his hand, not formally, not as a statement, just his hand, here, if she wanted it. And she took it, and they went to see the sharks. The months between January and the early warmth of April built on each other with the particular texture of a life being constructed rather than managed. There were things that were hard. Evelyn had a difficult board meeting in February where 2 members pushed back on the Vantara integration timeline, and she came home from it with the thin-stretched patience of someone who had been diplomatic for 4 hours and needed to not be diplomatic for approximately 90 minutes. And she called Logan, and they talked. She talked mostly, and he listened, and he pushed back twice in the specific way that was useful rather than challenging, and by the end she had the approach to the next board meeting mapped out. She didn't thank him. She said goodnight, and he said goodnight, and neither of them made it into more than what it was, which was 2 people who had incorporated each other into the ordinary business of getting through hard weeks. There was a day in March where Sophie had a bad one, a school thing, a friendship conflict that was abstract to everyone over the age of 12 and devastating to everyone under it. And she came home crying in the specific way of children who don't fully know why they're crying, and Logan texted Evelyn at 6:30. Sophie's having a rough night, going to stay close. Talk tomorrow? And Evelyn had texted back, of course. Tell her the octopus says hi. And at 8:15, Logan had texted, she laughed, thank you, which was small and entirely sufficient. There was a Sunday in April, warm enough to have the windows open, when Sophie was doing homework at Evelyn's kitchen table, and Evelyn was on a call with Singapore, and Logan was making coffee in the kitchen. And at one point she caught, over the voice of her Singapore counsel, the sound of Sophie asking Logan something about her homework, and Logan answering, and Sophie saying, that's wrong, Dad, and Logan saying, it's not wrong, and Sophie saying, I'll ask Evelyn, and Logan saying, Evelyn is on a call, and Sophie saying, I can wait. Evelyn finished her call, and Sophie asked, and Evelyn answered, and Sophie said, I told you, Dad, and Logan said, you're both ganging up on me. And the whole unremarkable thing lasted maybe 4 minutes, and she thought, this is a Saturday. I'm having a Saturday. She had not in 2 years had a Saturday. Her employees noticed. This was the part she hadn't anticipated, that other people would see the change before she fully measured it herself. It was Marcus first, who said nothing directly but started leaving small non-essential things off her desk on Friday afternoons, a quiet institutional acknowledgement that she had somewhere to be. Then it was her assistant Rena, who had worked for her for 3 years and communicated primarily through scheduling decisions, and who started building a consistent hour of white space into Sunday mornings without being asked. Then it was one of her senior product managers, a sharp woman named Joanne Park, who had been at Hawthorne Technologies since the beginning, who stopped her in the corridor one morning and said, I don't know what's different, but whatever it is, keep doing it. You were scary before. Now you're just present. It's better. Evelyn didn't entirely know what to do with that, so she thanked Joanne and kept moving. She told Logan about it that Tuesday. He was at the table with her, his off-the-clock Tuesday tradition now, and he said, You were scary before? Apparently. I didn't find you scary. You found me a little scary. He considered. Formidable, he said. There's a difference. What's the difference? Scary is someone you avoid. Formidable is someone you pay attention to. He picked up his coffee. I was paying attention. And now? Now I'm paying a different kind of attention. He looked at her. The kind that comes from knowing someone rather than figuring them out. She sat with that. Is it less interesting? He laughed. Evelyn, you are the least boring person I have ever had coffee with. That is never going to be a concern. She had been asking, she realized, something she hadn't quite meant to ask. Whether being known, fully known, without the mystique of a stranger, was enough to hold someone's attention. Whether she was interesting in the ordinary light of a Tuesday,
rather than the more dramatic light of a first impression. He had answered the question she hadn't asked. She did what she always did when something hit her harder than expected. She looked away and moved the conversation forward, and he let her because he'd learned to read that particular deflection and understood it wasn't avoidance so much as time, a few seconds to absorb something before continuing. "Sophie wants a fish," she said. "I know, she's been building the case for 3 months. She presented me with a document." Logan stared at her. "She what?" "A document, 2 pages, handwritten, with headers." Evelyn pulled it out of her bag. She'd been carrying it for a week because it was too good to leave at home, and slid it across the table. It was Sophie's handwriting, large and meticulous, with a title that read, "Why I Should Have a Fish," a presentation by Sophie Mercer. The headers were responsibility, cost, Dad will like this part, types of fish, what I will do if the fish dies. Logan read it. His face moved through several expressions, the last of which was the particular helpless amusement of a parent confronted with evidence of their own influence. "She put headers," he said. "She put headers. Where did she learn to structure an argument like this?" Evelyn said nothing and looked slightly to the side. Logan looked at her. "Did you? We may have talked once about how to make a persuasive case, in general terms." "Evelyn?" She asked. She's 7, and she had a thesis. I'm not going to tell her not to develop it." Evelyn looked at the document. "Also, the section on what she'll do if the fish dies is extremely mature. She addresses grief, logistics, and the option for a replacement. It's thorough." Logan sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of someone who has understood that a coalition has formed in his domestic life that he was not consulted on. "I'm getting a fish." "Yes." "I'm getting a fish because my 7-year-old and my girlfriend tag-teamed me." She had not heard him use the word out loud before. Neither of them had, actually. It had been a working understanding, a thing between them, but the word in the air was different. She felt it arrive and settle. "Is that a problem?" she asked. He looked at her. "No," he said. "I'm just acknowledging the dynamic." "Noted. You're going to be trouble," he said, but the tone was entirely warm, the kind of trouble someone calls you when they mean the opposite of trouble. "I've always been trouble," she said. "You knew that from the beginning." "I did." He picked up the document. "I'm keeping this." "I made a copy." He laughed again, and she laughed with him. And outside the shop's windows, April was moving through the city with its particular tentative warmth, and inside the warmth was a different kind, accumulated, earned, the kind that came from months of 2 people choosing, repeatedly, to keep showing up. She left that morning later than she should have and arrived at the office 11 minutes behind schedule, which was the first time in 2 years she had been late without an external reason. And when Rena looked up, she said nothing, only handed Evelyn her messages, and the very small curve at the corner of Rena's mouth communicated an opinion that she was professionally declining to share. "Don't," Evelyn said. "I didn't say anything," Rena said. "You were thinking loudly." "But I work for a CEO," Rena said, completely deadpan. "I never think." Evelyn went to her office. She sat at her desk, the large, clear desk facing the window that faced the building where Hawthorne Technologies had started, 9 floors down in the building across the street, and she opened her first meeting of the day, and she was present for it. Fully present, in the way she had always been present for work, but different now because the presence came from a life that extended past the desk rather than a life that was the desk. Marcus was in the meeting. Near the end, he glanced at her. Not to check on her, she knew. Marcus had stopped checking on her in that particular worried way around February, but just to see where she was. She met his eyes briefly. He gave the small nod of someone who has been paying attention for years and is quietly satisfied by what he sees now. She returned to the meeting. Outside, the April city was going about its life. All its traffic and noise and weather and the ongoing business of people trying, imperfectly, to build things worth having. Evelyn Hawthorne was 40 floors up, running a company, present in the room, alive in the way she had not been for 2 years. And underneath the day's agenda, the calls, the decisions, the forward motion of a billion-dollar enterprise, there was the simpler, more durable thing, A man who had called her formidable and meant it kindly. A girl who had written a document with headers, a yellow blanket on a museum white couch. She carried it through the whole day. It didn't weigh anything. That was the part she hadn't expected. It didn't weigh anything at all. The fish was named Gerald. Sophie had considered the name for 3 days with the seriousness she applied to most important decisions, rejecting Shark, Captain, and Blue in sequence before arriving at Gerald, which she announced at breakfast on a Saturday morning as if it had always been the only option. Logan said it was an unusual name for a betta fish. Sophie said unusual names were better because the fish would know it was his specifically. Logan looked at Evelyn across the kitchen table. Evelyn looked back with the expression of someone who had no intention of intervening. Gerald lived on the windowsill of Sophie's room in a small tank with a purple gravel base because purple was Sophie's second favorite color and she wanted him to feel at home. She fed him every morning before school with a focus that was absolute, and she talked to him, which Logan pretended not to notice and Evelyn thought was entirely reasonable. What Evelyn found the first Saturday morning she watched Sophie go through the feeding ritual, the measuring of the food, the small narration she provided Gerald about the weather, the careful check that the filter was running, was something she hadn't expected. A child who had been told things don't last and had decided to take care of them anyway. That was not a small thing to learn at 7. It was a Saturday in late May when the dinner happened, the one that would stay with Evelyn longer than most others, not because anything dramatic occurred, but because of what it made her understand, quietly and without announcement, about where she had arrived. Logan had cooked. This was not unusual by late May. He cooked at the apartment most weekends, and the kitchen that had previously contained mostly expensive appliances and takeout containers had been gradually, without formal declaration, converted into a place that was actually used. Sophie had helped with the salad, which meant the salad had some structural ambition that exceeded its execution, but tasted fine. Evelyn had handled the bread, which she had gotten consistently right over the previous month through the specific stubbornness of someone who doesn't accept incompetence in themselves at anything for very long. They ate. The conversation moved the way it did on good evenings. Without a destination, just from thing to thing, Sophie reporting on a disagreement at school that she'd resolved by telling both parties they were being illogical, which Logan said was effective but might eventually lose her some friends. And Sophie said that if they couldn't handle logic, they probably weren't her best friends anyway. And Evelyn said, she's not wrong. At the same moment, Logan said, that's not entirely how friendship works. And they looked at each other, and Sophie looked at both of them with the evaluating expression of someone taking a vote count. After dinner, Sophie wanted to show Evelyn something she'd been working on, a drawing, a large one, done on the back of a piece of poster board she'd found somewhere. She went to get it from the other room, and Logan cleared plates, and Evelyn sat at the table in the quiet of the kitchen with the evening light coming in from the west, the city outside the windows doing what it always did. And she was not anxious, not managing anything, not holding herself at the particular controlled distance she had maintained for 2 years from anything that could hurt her. She was just there, in a kitchen, after dinner, waiting for a 7-year-old to bring a drawing. She thought, my father was trying to tell me something I didn't have the equipment to hear yet. Sophie came back with the drawing. It was large, as advertised, a full piece of poster board covered in her particular visual logic, which was ambitious in scope and not especially constrained by spatial accuracy. There was a house, which Evelyn recognized as her apartment building roughly interpreted. There was a coffee shop which had MRSRS on the awning because Sophie had been slightly uncertain about the spelling. There were 3 figures in front of the coffee shop, a tall figure, a small figure, and a figure in a wheelchair with what appeared to be a purple chair, because Sophie had remembered that detail and made it nice. Evelyn looked at the drawing for a long moment. That's us, Sophie said, pointing at the 3 figures. I put us in front of Dad's shop because that's where we all met. It's very good, Evelyn said. The chair's purple because I know your real one is black, but I like how purple looks in the picture. Sophie examined it critically. I made Gerald too, but he's very small, so you might not see him. Evelyn looked. In the corner of what was apparently a window in the apartment building, there was a tiny rectangle with a tiny dot inside it. Gerald. She looked at that for a longer moment than the rest of the drawing. I see him, she said. Good. Sophie accepted this with satisfaction. I'm going to hang it in my room. Is that okay, even though you're in it? Yes. Evelyn said. That's okay. Sophie took the drawing back to her room. Logan was watching from the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame, dish towel in hand, with the look of someone who had decided that this particular moment didn't require any commentary from him.
She drew Gerald specifically small so I'd have to look for him, Evelyn said. Absolutely, she did. That's a very advanced thing for a 7-year-old to understand about looking. She understands more than she lets on. He came back to the table, sat across from her. The kitchen was clean and the light was going amber, and Gerald was in the other room being looked after. And it was a completely ordinary evening. You okay? I'm good.
She said it without the qualification she used to attach to it. Not fine, like I'm managing, just good. I was thinking about something. He waited. When the accident happened, she said, the first thing I did was go back to work. You know that. And everyone at the time, my doctors, the physical therapist, people who cared about me, said it was avoidance, that I was using work to not deal with what I'd lost. And they were right. She looked at her hands on the table. But there was something else in it too, which I couldn't see clearly until now. I went back to work because it was the one thing I knew for certain was still mine. The company, the decisions, the thing I'd built, the accident couldn't touch it. It was still there, exactly the same, waiting for me. And I needed something that hadn't changed. Logan was quiet, listening. I think I thought that love was the opposite of that it was the category of things that changed, that broke, that could be taken. The accident took my mobility. Before that, my mother's illness took her, slowly, and I watched my father lose a version of himself in that loss. She paused. So I think I just stopped expecting permanence from that category of things. I kept building things that lasted instead. Companies, structures, systems, things I could control. And now, he said, and now I have a drawing on the way to a 7-year-old's wall with a very small fish in the corner of it. She looked at him. And I understand that permanence isn't the thing. That's not what I was actually looking for. What I was looking for was someone who would stay in it with me. In the uncertain part, the part where we don't know how it turns out, without needing a guarantee first. Logan held her gaze. I don't have a guarantee to offer. I know. That used to be the problem. She turned her water glass the way she always turned it, the same gesture she'd never noticed in herself until Sophie pointed it out one afternoon, delighted to have spotted a family tick. Now it just sounds like honesty, and I'd rather have the honesty. He reached across the table. Not dramatically, not with any particular weight. Just his hand, resting on the table near hers. She put her hand in it. I'm not good at this yet, she said. I want you to know I know that. I still retreat. I still work when I should stop working. I still manage things that would be better just felt. I know. I'm working on it. I know that too. His thumb moved across the back of her hand. I'm not good at it either. I still have evenings where I go very quiet, and Sophie can hear me in the kitchen, and I can't fully explain what I'm doing in there. He paused. We're both making it up as we go. That doesn't scare you? It scares me, he said. But I've learned the difference between fear that means stop and fear that means pay attention. He looked at her. This is the second one. Oh, cool. She told her father in June over Sunday dinner, and the telling was not a conversation so much as a morning that had been building toward one. She arrived early, which she never did, and found Richard in the garden, a thing he did in summer when the weather allowed, walking the perimeter of it with the focused aimlessness of a man who spent most of his life in rooms and forgot, periodically, that he liked to be outside. He was getting older. She registered this with the particular precision of a person who had stopped taking continuous things for granted, and she watched him walk the garden for a moment before he saw her, and when he saw her, his face did the thing it did. The opening, the specific, unguarded quality she'd only ever seen when he looked at her and didn't know she was looking back. You're early, he said. I wanted to talk before dinner. He studied her face. Whatever he saw there made him fold his reading glasses into his breast pocket, which was the gesture of a man preparing to be fully present. All right. They sat on the garden bench, which was cold still in the shadow of the house, and she looked at the garden that had been her mother's project decades ago, and that the gardener maintained faithfully with no living input from anyone who'd made the original choices, and she said, I'm going to ask Logan to move in. Richard was quiet.
Not immediately. We've talked about it generally. He has Sophie to think about, and the shop, and Sophie's school. There are practical things to sort through, but that's the direction. I want you to know before it happens. Her father looked at the garden. A bird moved through the bushes at the far end. He was doing the things she'd watched him do her whole life, processing, calculating, running the variables. And she let him do it because trying to interrupt it had never once helped. The girl, he said. Sophie. She'd be part of the household, yes. You've thought about what that means. I have. Children are... It's not a small thing, Evelyn, especially a child who's already experienced loss. She attaches. If anything happens between you and Logan, I know. She met his eyes. I know the weight of it. Do you want children? He asked. It was the first time he'd asked her directly, and she understood the courage it took him to ask it. The risk that the answer was complicated, that the accident had made it complicated in ways he hadn't wanted to push. I don't know what I can carry biologically, she said. I haven't pushed hard on that question yet. She held his gaze. But I know that Sophie Mercer has been drawing me into the pictures of her life for 6 months, and I know that matters more to me than I expected it to. And I know that when I think about what the next 10 years look like, she's in them. Richard looked at his hands. Your mother would have liked her, he said. It came out quieter than his usual voice. Evelyn sat with that for a moment. Tell me why. He thought about it genuinely. She was stubborn about things that mattered. She could tell when someone was performing and when they were real. A pause. She wrote me a letter once when we were first together and I was trying too hard to impress her. She said, Richard, you don't have to be remarkable. You just have to show up. He turned his glasses in his hand. I kept trying to be remarkable for years before I understood what she meant. Evelyn looked at her father, this complicated, controlled, deeply loving man who had spent decades trying to manage the distance between how much he cared and how much he allowed himself to show it. I think I'm finally learning to just show up, she said. He reached over and covered her hand with his, briefly, the way he did when something was too large for his particular language. Good, he said. That's all I ever wanted for you. The garden was quiet around them. The bird had moved further into the bushes. The sun came around the corner of the house and found the bench. It was a Saturday in early July when Logan came to her with the question that was not technically a question. Sophie was spending the night at Mrs. Okafor's, a regular occurrence now, an arrangement Mrs. Okafor had formalized by telling Logan that she expected Sophie every other Saturday, and he was not to argue about it because she enjoyed the company, and her apartment was quiet the other weekends. Logan had come to the apartment after closing the shop, and they'd eaten the dinner Evelyn had made, which was genuinely good now, not just close. She'd put in the work with the particular commitment she applied to things she'd decided to be competent at. And they were on the couch afterward, Evelyn with a report she was reading, Logan with a book, the yellow blanket that had long since stopped looking wrong draped over them both. He put his book down. She looked up. He said, I've been thinking about the move. She set the report down. And? Sophie's school year ends in 3 weeks. If we're going to change her living situation, summer is when it disrupts the least. He was matter-of-fact about the logistics, which was his way of handling things that had an emotional component he wasn't ready to address head-on. She recognized the method because it was also hers. The apartment building across from the shop has a 2-bedroom available. I looked at it. She was quiet. Or, he said, and the word landed differently than the rest of what he'd been saying, we don't do that. What's the other option? Sophie and I move here. He said it to the middle distance, the way you say things you've been turning over for a while and are finally saying out loud, which is a different kind of step, bigger. And I want to be clear that I'm not assuming, I'm not asking because of the space or the accessibility or any practical reason. I'm asking because I want to live in the same place as you. That's the reason. Logan, I also want to be clear that it changes things for Sophie in a real way. She'd be in a new place. Her room is her room. She's got Gerald and her shark books and the poster she made and the way Mrs. Okafor is 2 blocks from the shop. Moving here puts Mrs. Okafor across the city. He turned to look at her. I'm not saying no to it.
I'm saying I want us to go in clear about what it actually costs, not just what it gains. She studied him. He had always done this, laid out the full picture, the actual costs, without softening them into palatability. It was one of the things she'd loved first about him, the absence of salesmanship, the refusal to make things easier by making them smaller. "Have you talked to Sophie?" she said. I asked her what she'd think about living somewhere different. She asked if Gerald could come. I said yes. She said, "Then I'll think about it." And then the next day she came to me and said, "I think we should live where Evelyn is because she remembers things, and the apartment has good light for drawing." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She said that. Good light for drawing. She's been watching the light in my apartment. She watches everything, Logan said. She's been watching you specifically for months. The way you work at the table, the way you navigate the kitchen, the way you talk to her like she's a person and not a project. He paused. She doesn't have language for it yet, but she understands that you're someone who pays attention without wanting anything for it. She's 7, and she understands that that's rare. Evelyn sat with this for a while. "My father," she said finally, "told me once that the way you know if something is worth keeping is whether it makes you want to be better at the hard parts." She looked at Logan. "Every hard part of the last year, the days I didn't want to be opened up, the days I went back to managing everything at arm's length. You showed up for those. Not with solutions, just with presence." She paused. "You don't fix things. You stay for them. There's a difference." "I've had some practice with the not fixing part," he said quietly. She knew what he meant. Claire. 14 months of showing up for something that couldn't be fixed. "I know," she said, "and I know what it cost." She looked at him steadily, "Which is why I believe you when you say you'll stay, because staying through the unfixable is a specific kind of courage, and you've done it, and it didn't make you leave. It made you this." He was quiet. "Move in," she said, "both of you. Sophie can have the second bedroom and we'll get her the light she needs for drawing, and Gerald can live on whatever windowsill she wants." She paused. "And we figure out Mrs. Okafor." "We figure out Mrs. Okafor," he said. "She can come to dinner. My father already likes her. He'd like her. They could argue about politics and she'd win." He smiled. The real one. She'd seen it hundreds of times now, and it still did the same thing. Arrived slightly ahead of his permission, changed the whole register of the room. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He picked his book back up. She picked her report back up. The city outside the windows did its evening thing, and the yellow blanket was between them. And they stayed like that for a long time in the easy quiet of people who had stopped needing every shared silence to justify itself. Mrs. Okafor came to dinner in August, 3 weeks after Logan and Sophie had moved the last boxes in. A process that had taken 2 weekends, involved Gerald being transported in his tank wrapped in a towel in Logan's lap in the back of the car, and resulted in Sophie declaring that the second bedroom's light was, indeed, exactly right. Mrs. Okafor was 73, Nigerian-American, with the particular authority of a woman who had outlasted several generations of other people's certainties about how things worked. She brought a dish she called egusi soup, which she made Logan promise to have a second bowl of, and she arrived at the apartment and walked through it slowly, the way a person does when they're deciding whether a space has been made livable rather than merely decorated. And at the end of the tour, she stood in the kitchen and said, "It's a good home. It was just waiting." Evelyn looked at her. "Waiting for what?" "For people," Mrs. Okafor said simply, as if this were evident. "Apartments are just rooms until you put people in them who mean something to each other." Richard Hawthorne arrived 40 minutes later and did, in fact, argue with Mrs. Okafor about 3 things over the course of the evening: a city council decision, the correct preparation of rice, and whether Sophie should be allowed to stay up an extra 30 minutes. And Mrs. Okafor won 2 of the 3, which Richard appeared to find more satisfying than losing would suggest. Sophie sat at the table through the whole dinner, which she managed by taking it one conversation at a time and periodically disappearing to check on Gerald and returning with updates no one had requested, and she fell asleep on the couch at 9:15 with her shoes still on. Logan carried her to her room. Evelyn could hear him from the hallway. The brief sounds of a child being settled, shoes removed, blanket arranged, the low murmur of his voice and Sophie's drowsy response. Richard was in the kitchen doorway watching the hallway. He's a good father, he said, not as revelation, as the simple acknowledgement of a thing he'd been assessing for months and had now finished assessing. He is, Evelyn said. Good fathers are rarer than people say. She looked at her own father. They are. He held her gaze for a moment, and in it was everything they were too precise with each other to say directly. The accident, the years, the Sunday dinners, the men who had wanted the wrong things, the long road between what he'd feared for her and what was standing in this apartment right now. His eyes were tired and clear and full. He nodded once. She nodded back. It was enough. There's a particular kind of happiness that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with music or epiphany or the obvious momentum of a life turning around. It accumulates instead, slowly, in the texture of days, in the way an apartment gets warm in winter, in the way a child starts to assume you'll be at the table in the morning without being told you will. It's the happiness of the ordinary that was once impossible. Evelyn Hawthorne would tell you, if you asked her directly and she was in a mood to answer directly, that the accident at 32 was the most defining thing that had ever happened to her body, and also, eventually, one of the most instructive things that had ever happened to her life. Not because suffering is useful, it isn't, not in itself, not without the work you put in after, but because it stripped everything down to what held and what didn't. What held? The company, the work, the core of who she was without the walking. What didn't hold? The fiction that you could build a life entirely out of things you controlled. Control was still her instinct. She still arrived over-prepared to rooms that didn't require it. She still worked evenings she should stop. She still retreated, sometimes, into the managed quiet of her own head when the feeling was too large and she didn't trust herself to hold it without dropping something else. But she was not who she had been. She understood now. In a way you can only understand things by living them, not by thinking them through. That her father had not been trying to find her a caretaker. He had not been suggesting, all those Sunday dinners with all those careful men, that she needed someone to navigate the wheelchair or manage the fortune or take the weight of the company. He was saying something much simpler and much harder, that the most dangerous form of loneliness is the kind that looks like self-sufficiency. That you can be brilliant and capable and respected, and building something enormous and still be, underneath all of it, unreached. That the wheelchair was not the obstacle to love he feared it was. The fear was the obstacle, the decision to need no one. Logan Mercer had not rescued her from that fear. That wasn't what happened, and it would be dishonest to say it was. What happened was that he had simply refused to participate in it. He had spoken to her plainly when plain speech was what she needed. He had pushed back when she was wrong. He had stayed in the room when the room got difficult. And he had done none of these things as performance or strategy. He had done them because that was the person he was. The person that 14 months of watching someone he loved die slowly had made him. The person who had come out the other side, not harder, but more honest about what mattered. You don't find people like that by looking for them. You find them by accidentally stopping in the right doorway. Logan would tell you, if you asked him, that what he had feared after Claire was not love itself, but the version of himself that would be left if it broke again. That he had constructed his life, the shop, the apartment, the careful orbit around Sophie's needs, as a system that was complete enough not to require addition. That he had been, without quite knowing it, waiting for the thing that would make addition feel like less of a risk than the alternative, which was a life held permanently at the edge of what was safe. He was not a man who talked about these things easily. He talked about them with Evelyn on the evenings when Sophie was asleep and the apartment was quiet and the city did its patient thing outside. And he talked about them inexpertly, sometimes stopping and restarting, losing the thread and finding it again. And she sat with the imperfect version because she understood that the imperfect version was the true one, and the true one was what she'd come for. That fall, on a morning in October that was cool and gray in the particular way of their first October now shared, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with her coffee. The Burundi, still her favorite, which Logan brought home from the shop. And Sophie came into the kitchen in her school uniform with her hair half done, holding a brush and looking harassed. "I can't get the back," she said. "Sit down," Evelyn said. Sophie sat in the chair beside her, turning her back, and Evelyn finished what Sophie had started, working through the knots with the specific patience of someone who had learned it rather than always having it. Sophie held still, which she was not always good at, and looked out the kitchen window at the October city. "Evelyn," she said. When you were little, did you know what you were going to be?" Evelyn worked through a tangle. "No, I knew I liked building things. Problems with solutions. I didn't know what form that was going to take." "I know what I want to be," Sophie said. "What?" "A marine biologist who also does architecture." She said it as if this were an obvious and achievable combination. "Because I want to build things that work for sea animals, like better habitats, in aquariums but also in the ocean, structures that help." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "That's a very specific thing. Is it bad to be specific?" "It's very good to be specific." Sophie considered the city. "Dad says you built a company when you were young, when I was 24. Were you scared?" "Every day." "But you did it anyway." "I didn't know how not to." She finished the hair, smoothed it down. "Done." Sophie turned around, checked herself in the kitchen window reflection, and declared it acceptable. She picked up her backpack, which was covered in iron-on patches of various marine animals, and then she stopped at the kitchen door and turned back. "Evelyn." "Yeah." "I'm glad we moved here," she said, simply, without performance, the way she said true things. Then she went to get her shoes, and Logan appeared in the kitchen doorway in his apron, already dressed for the shop, with his own coffee, and he had heard what Sophie said because their apartment was not large enough for privacy in the mornings. And he looked at Evelyn, and she looked at him. She was 31 years old. She ran a company that employed 900 people. She made decisions every day that moved money and futures and the working lives of people she was responsible for. She was in a wheelchair that she had had custom built, and that she navigated with the efficiency of someone who had decided a long time ago that the chair was a tool and not a sentence, and mostly she believed that. She was also a woman who had spent 2 years afraid of the specific variety of vulnerability that couldn't be spreadsheet managed, who had gone to a coffee shop on a cold morning for no particular reason and found something she hadn't known she was looking for, who had learned, slowly, imperfectly, with the help of a stubborn man and a fearless 7-year-old and a yellow blanket that still looked slightly wrong against the white couch, that the things you build out of trust and time and the willingness to stay for the hard parts are the things that actually hold. She had been trying her whole career to build things that lasted. She had not understood, until fairly recently, that you couldn't construct your way into it. You had to risk your way in. You had to open the door and stay in the room and let someone see the full version of you. The capable version, and the scared version, and the version that turned water glasses on the table when she didn't know what to do with her hands. And trust that the scene wouldn't end it. It hadn't ended it. There is something her father said at that first dinner that she had turned over many times since. He said that good fathers were rarer than people said. He was not only talking about Logan, she understood that now. He was also, in his particular compressed language, talking about the fathering he had attempted and the places it had gone right and the places it had fallen short, and the specific grief of a man who had watched his daughter become extraordinary in ways that included, for a long time, not needing anyone. She had needed someone. She had been wrong to call that weakness. Needing is what makes the reaching possible, and the reaching is the whole thing, the whole human project, the whole reason any of this matters. You reach towards something, and sometimes you miss, and sometimes you lose it, and sometimes the truck runs the red light, and nothing is the same after. And sometimes you stop in a doorway because a chalk sign said something true about a quiet morning, and the man behind the counter looks at you without the flicker, and 3 years later a child tells you she's glad she moved to where you are. That's not rescue. That's not a fairy tale. That's two people who had both lost things deciding, separately and then together, that the loss did not have to be the last word. Logan set his coffee down and came to the table and kissed her on the top of her head, brief and warm, the kind of gesture that had become so native to the mornings that she would have felt its absence the way you feel the absence of something that was always there. Then he went to the hallway to help Sophie find her shoes, which were not where she'd left them, which they never were. Evelyn sat with her coffee in the October kitchen. Gerald was visible from the kitchen doorway, in his tank in Sophie's room, moving through the purple gravel water with his small, unconcerned life. The city was coming awake outside. In 10 minutes, she'd be in the car, heading to the office. In 3 hours, Logan would open the shop. At 6, they'd meet back here, and there would be the ordinary noise of an evening, homework, dinner, the mid-evening quiet, Sophie's bedtime negotiations, which she never fully won. It was a small life, alongside the large one. That was the combination she hadn't understood was possible. That you didn't have to choose between building something that mattered and coming home to something that mattered. That the choosing was a false architecture. That the real structure was simpler. You show up, fully, for both. Her phone lit on the table. A text from Marcus. Singapore moved to 8:30. You good? She typed back, yes, I'm good. She meant it, completely, without qualification. Out in the hallway, Sophie had found one shoe and was blaming the other's disappearance on physics. And Logan was explaining patiently that physics was not responsible. And Sophie was making her case with supporting evidence. And Evelyn sat at the kitchen table of the life she had built. The whole imperfect, ordinary, deeply felt life of it. And she was, in the truest sense of the word, home.